Hey everybody, really glad to be with you today. We're shooting this on March 21st, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Racism here in Canada and around the world. This day, of course, marks the day, terrible day in South Africa many years ago when South African police shot and killed 69 people in Sharpeville, South Africa, and then 180 other people were wounded in that incident. And so that the day against for the International Day for the Elimination of Racism was declared by South African black people at that time, and so we marked this date in Canada and around the world. Unfortunately, on this day in 2012, we still see that racialized peoples in Canada, Aboriginal peoples in Canada, face many challenges, and we see the evidence of that in the news. But I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about some of the things that get talked about in terms of the current the moves by our provincial and our federal and our local governments to cut back, to privatize. We don't often hear about how these kinds of moves actually are going to affect women, and particularly racialized women. And it's important for us to understand that when our governments talk about needing to cut back and put limits on the public sector and lose public sector jobs, what we're really talking about is that women and racialized women are going to be losing jobs. A woman named Linda Briskin recently wrote in a publication called the OPSU Dialogue that in the public sector, 60% of the jobs are held by women. And I can tell you, I don't know the figures, but I know that many of those jobs are held by racialized women. In healthcare, where the representation of women of color and immigrant women is even higher, we know that there are 82% of those jobs are held by women. And so when we hear our governments talk about cutting public sector positions, and today in the paper we're hearing the Toronto District School Board talk about axing, I think, up to 200 educational assistant jobs. They're talking about letting go of assistants in the classrooms. We are really talking about losing jobs for women and racialized women in particular. The other thing to remember is that and Linda Briskin writes about this as well, is that when Dalton McGuinty talks about shifting employment from hospitals, for example, if we're talking about the healthcare sector, when he's talking about shifting those jobs from hospitals to community-based agencies, what we're talking about is shifting jobs, and again, we're talking mostly about women and racialized women here. We're talking about shifting jobs from better paying jobs in hospitals and also full-time jobs. We're talking about shifting those to lower paying jobs. The jobs in the community-based sector are not nearly as well paid and as secure as they are in hospitals where we've got these unionized positions. So it's again primarily affecting women. Another woman named Salima Valiani has written, she's an economist with the Ontario Nurses Association. She has written extensively about this as well. And Salima says, and many others have said this as well, is that the government, the provincial government in this case, when they're looking at enacting cuts, when they're looking at changing the ways structurally that they do business in order to save money, and particularly as our government looks at implementing the recommendations of the Drummond Report, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. When they're talking about doing that, they need to be bringing a gender lens. I'm part of a group called Economic Inequality Working Group. We talk about needing to bring an inequality lens, or an equality lens actually. So when we're talking about doing these kinds of shifts and really restructuring our public services, which is what we're seeing on all levels of government right now, we need to be doing that with an eye to how that's going to impact women, and particularly how that's going to impact racialized women and Aboriginal women when we're looking at making those cuts. Because if these cuts and if these moves to restructure are going to increase the gap between rich and poor, and are going to increase the numbers of part-time jobs, for example, at the loss of full-time jobs, if they're going to increase the inequality that women and racialized women experience, then we've got a big problem, and we need to, as members of the public, as voters, we need to bring pressure to bear on our politicians and to let them know that we are not going to stand for that. So it's really important when we read in the paper, for example, about the current library strike that's going on in the city of Toronto. And I'll give you, we'll put up a couple of addresses on the screen where you can get more information about where pickets are happening and the libraries that are affected. It's again important for us to understand that these attacks on library workers, and in the city of Toronto we also have a vote coming up by our inside workers. They took a vote on whether or not they are going to give their union a strike mandate. They took that vote just on a couple of days ago on March 20th, just yesterday. So when we see the city looking to privatize, looking to change the way that services are delivered at our libraries, looking to change the way that services are delivered by our inside workers, that's the group that just took that vote the other day, we're talking about a workforce that is primarily racialized women, white women, immigrant women, Aboriginal women. These are the people that are going to be most affected by these moves. And if you go down and support the picket lines at the Toronto Library, and you can find information about how to support librarians at one website is local4948.org. Another website you can go to is ourpubliclibrary.to. Go to either of these websites to find out where these picket lines are being set up from day to day. You can find that information. You can join the picket line, and when you go to the picket line and when you see who is on strike, you're going to see that we're talking about racialized women, we're talking about non-racialized white women, and that these are the people who are really under attack right now. When we talk about the inside workers at the city and who just took that strike vote and who are bargaining with the city right now, we're talking about people who provide childcare services. We're talking about women who work at OW. We're talking about, for the City of Toronto, the Toronto Employment and Social Services. We're talking about people who work in City Hall. So when we talk about these inside workers, again, we use these terms, you know, workers, public sector workers, union workers. We really have to remember that these cuts and these efforts to privatize and these hardball tactics, the city has pursued a line with unions, both the outside workers and now with librarians and inside workers, that really are about reducing job security. That's the one thing they really want to attack. Reducing job security, that means women workers losing the right to have their jobs protected even after many, many years of seniority. What we're seeing is that there is a move on the part of the city and the province to increase the number of part-time workers. I can tell you, as someone who works in the college system, that we already see that happening in colleges and universities, another public sector where we have many, many women working. And we certainly see that in the private sector. This move to have people working temporary contracts, contingent work, contracts that they have to renew over and over and over again, no job security. And when people, and particularly women, who more and more often head up their families and are responsible for supporting themselves and their kids, when we see that happening, what we see is we have workers who can't count on their next paycheck, who can't make long-term investments in their families, who can't consider buying a home or saving up for their kids' education, and who have to work 2 and 3 jobs, who can't be there and enjoy that quality of life that we all deserve. And so that's really important for us to remember, that these cutbacks that are being talked about at all levels of government are affecting women, and particularly they're affecting racialized women. And that's an important thing for us to remember on this International Day to eliminate racial discrimination. There's lots that you can do about that. You can get involved with a local group like Toronto Stop the Cuts. You can go down to a picket line and support these CUPE workers, support librarians, and I'm afraid probably we're going to be looking at lots of other places where we need to support people. We already know that workers at the Fred Victor Shelter for Women are in an effort to unionize, and they're facing challenges. So you can find out more about these struggles that women and racialized women are involved in. You can also make yourself informed by going to the websites I've mentioned, to Toronto Stop the Cuts, other sources, to find out what the city has planned. One thing that the library workers are letting us know is that a US-based library management corporation called Library Systems and Services has retained a lobbyist named Doug Christie. Doug Christie is a former city politician here in Toronto with close ties to Mayor Ford. And so one of the things, and Doug Christie is one of the appointees on the library board during this last summer's budget showdown. So it's important to make those links. We also, I know, face, and if you go to the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare site, you will know that they are warning us about the possibility of looking at, of having private daycare corporations. There's a huge one out of Australia, I believe, called ABC Childcare, I believe, that is just ready to pounce and enter into public-private partnerships and other stealth forms of privatization that are being put forward by our local, provincial, and federal governments. So it's important for us to inform ourselves about these things. It's important for us to stay in touch with our local city councillor. You can find their address at toronto.ca. It's important for us to go to our government webpage, that's ontario.ca, and find out the address of your MPP, and to write to those people and let them know that you are not in support of cuts and actions by our government that would harm women workers, that you know that when the governments attack public sector workers, that they're really attacking racialized women and their families. And it's important that we let them know that we're not going to stand up for that, and we're going to remember this when it comes next time to vote and when they're looking for our support. So let's make sure to do that. Let's do our bit to support these women workers, to support our sisters and our brothers, of course, on the union lines, and to make ourselves informed so that we can let the people around us know that when we're talking about public sector workers, we're really, and when we're talking about good paying jobs with job security, we're talking about what everybody deserves, and that we want to work together with our sisters in the public sector to protect those jobs, because lifting up those jobs lifts up our entire community. Thanks a lot.